The following podcast is entirely a work of fanfiction. It is unofficial, unaffiliated, and unauthorized. Neither the podcast nor any individual involved in its production is now, nor has ever been, in any way associated with HBO, Game of Thrones, George R.R. Martin, or the Song of Ice and Fire book series. The podcast was, is now, and shall always be entirely without profit. Neither the podcast directly, nor its makers indirectly, generate or receive any form of revenue or financial restitution that might otherwise accrue to the rightful copyright holders. The following podcast is entirely a work of fanfiction. We hope you enjoy it.
Bran stands before his father, the lines of Ned Stark's face beginning to waver and blur as Bran's eyes fill with tears. Ned sets his great sword aside, holding his arms outstretched to his son. Bran runs to him. Ned holds Bran at arm's length and looks him over.
I'm so sorry I couldn't be there to see you grow up. But you need to know, I might not have been there in body, Bran. But me and your mother, your brothers, we've been with you every day. Every choice you've made, every decision, we were right there beside you, whether it seemed like it or not. And we're so proud of you, son. I'm so proud of you.
The Mountain and the Hound have reverted to childhood, descending into the most basic mode of battle, the two brothers wailing on each other with naked fists. The Hound feels his jaw crack beneath the Mountain's blows. He stumbles, staggers, and falls. The Mountain retrieves his sword from the dirt and closes on his brother, swinging wildly. The Hound ducks and weaves away from the Mountain's blade, but can't avoid his clubbing fist. He staggers backwards into the cavern and into his own personal hell. Flames whip and crack at him from every direction. The air scalds his lungs. The fires singe his hair. The heat blisters and burns his skin. The Hound recoils in terror, propelling himself away from the flames and straight onto the end of his brother's sword. The Mountain retracts his blade, and the Hound drops to the floor. Tossing the sword aside, the Mountain picks his brother up by the throat and slams him into the cavern wall. Clamping his paw-like hands around the Hound's skull, the Mountain begins to squeeze. The window of the inn shatters, and 100 pairs of arms snake around the bars, the frame fast filling with wights, clawing and clambering over and around one another to try and get inside. The undead pound at the door, wailing in anger and frustration, the wood groaning ominously under the strain. Podrick and Tormund brace the door with their backs. Beric and Gendry overturn a wooden table and cover the window, leaning with all their body weight against the undead press. Jaime tentatively steps into the room. On overcrowded shelves, a multitude of body parts, animal, human, unidentifiable, float in jars of variously coloured fluids. Flies buzz around big wooden crates filled with rotting meat and the bones of all manner of bird and beast. Jaime gags as he comes across a row of human arms, each severed at the elbow. The first belongs to the wight brought by Jon and company to the Dragon Pit summit. The second and third to Archmaester Ebros. Into the stumps feed a series of clear tubes connected to a large vat, pumping a green liquid in and through and out of the arms. As Jaime inspects the hands, the closest set of fingers spasm. Jaime begins to turn away, but does a double take at the sight of two more hands similarly prepared. By their size, it's clear these hands belong to a child. Qyburn sits perched on a stool on the far side of a large surgical table that occupies the centre of the room.
I tried for so many years, feeling around blindly in the darkness, searching desperately for the light of discovery. If I'd only known that the darkness was where the answers lay all along.
As he talks, Jaime begins to sidle around the table, closing the space between him and Qyburn. He stops short as the filthy sheet that covers the table twitches.
There was only so much I could achieve via scientific methods. Well, Sir Gregor was a breakthrough, it's true, but I found myself unable to replicate my success. Only a subject of Sir Gregor's singular constitution could withstand the process, you see. And then came that day in the dragon pit.
Qyburn follows Jaime's gaze to the sheet.
Ah, yes, a gift for her grace.
Jaime peels back the sheet. The half-rotten face of Princess Myrcella stares up at him. Jaime reels back into a cabinet of vials and beakers.
I did try with King Joffrey, truly I did. But alas, the poison that killed him corrupted his insides beyond salvage. As for King Tommen, well, when one jumps from the highest window of the Red Keep, there really isn't too much left with which to work, I'm sorry to say. Is it magic? Or some branch of the sciences we've yet to fully comprehend? They do say the two are indistinguishable to the untrained eye.
Myrcella turns her head towards Jaime. He stares into a pair of ice-blue eyes. Jaime runs a hand over Myrcella's cheek. With a look of grim resignation, he draws his dirk and pushes it as gently as possible through her ear cavity into her skull. He covers her again with the sheet, then turns to confront Qyburn. The disgraced maester looks at the sword in surprise.
Oh, I'm afraid not.
A dozen little street urchins scuttle from some undiscovered room and surround Qyburn. They stare at Jaime with the same dead blue eyes as his daughter.
I couldn't possibly leave my little birds.
Jaime pushes over one of the large vats, spilling its contents over the floor, and snatches up the nearest lamp.
As you like.
He smashes it down to explode off the stone, and the spilled liquid immediately ignites. Jaime hurries to the exit as the fire greedily devours the contents of the laboratory, Qyburn fussing over his little birds, standing serenely amid the flames. Arya hangs by her satchel, the strap snagged on the craggy lip of the promontory. Already she can feel the bag beginning to tear, the seams popping under the strain of supporting her entire weight. All that separates salvation above from certain death below is burlap and stitching. The Hound screams in pain. Blood trickles from his ears, the whites of his eyes turn red, and their capillaries pop. He beats at the Mountain's arms, but finds his brother's grip unbreakable as iron. With a roar of desperate rage, the Hound shoves his thumbs into the Mountain's eye sockets and pushes in until black ooze pours over his hands. Finally, the Mountain breaks his grip and staggers back, clutching at his face. Without the Mountain holding him up, the Hound immediately crumples to the ground. Arya places hand over hand, using the unwound fabric of her satchel as a rope to pull herself up. She reaches, stretches her fingertips, grazing the edge of the platform. The satchel's pouch rips along its seam. Arya stops with a jolt. The torn fabric she clings to immediately begins to pull away from the strap. Just 2 lines of stitching keeping Arya aloft now. The contents of the satchel spill into the air. A dozen different faces follow the mountain's helmet into the black water, Arya barely registering Grey Worm's eyeless aspect as it drifts down past her own. The Hound searches the ground for a rock, a piece of wood, anything at all he can use to keep the mountain at bay. That's when he sees it. His sword, not more than 5 feet away, and surrounded by fire. The Hound wavers, but one quick glance at his brother settles his mind. The mountain is already closing in, clawing the air, reaching blindly for his brother. The Hound shoves his hand through the flames. The flesh of his forearm bubbles and bursts. His hand crackles like frying bacon. His palm melts around the white-hot hilt. Just as the mountain's shadow falls over him, the Hound stands, spins and swings the sword. The Hound throws down the sword and cradles his burned arm to his chest. Whimpering in pain, he collapses to the ground beside the decapitated body of his brother. Daenerys flies Drogon beyond the Red Keep. In the distance, Viserion circles the city, searching. Daenerys smiles to herself as the dragon breaks its flight path. They've been spotted, and now it's the Night King's turn to give chase. Daenerys waits until Viserion comes within calling distance before she finally directs Drogon to beat an unhurried retreat. Squinting through the snow, Daenerys can just make out the line of 6 stone archers that demarcates the ruins of the dragon pit. She angles Drogon into a sharp descent, levelling him out barely 50 feet above the ground. The pristine white carpet rushes past below. As Drogon gobbles up the distance before the dragon pit's archers, Daenerys checks quickly over her shoulder and confirms that the Night King has followed their flight path and still dogs their tail.
Slow, slow.
Viserion bites over and again at Drogon's tail, but misses each time, every mouthful of air spurring him to a greater fury. The Night King's attention is focused entirely on the prey, only barely beyond his reach, but Daenerys's is concentrated on the looming archers and the segment of snow-covered ceiling they still support. She makes no effort to swerve away, and instead aims Drogon directly for the nearest archway. Daenerys runs her hand down Drogon's neck. He recognizes immediately the off-drilled instruction and pins his wings tight to his body, making himself as narrow as possible. One more quick glance over her shoulder reaffirms for Daenerys that Viserion has done likewise.
Ready?
Drogon enters the shadow of the archway, the twin stone columns almost close enough to touch.
Ready? Seer!
Drogon shoots out both his wings to full extension. They scythe through the columns like a knife through warm butter. The Night King doesn't even have time to brace himself. 20 tons of stone and marble bury dragon and rider both. Beric and Gendry strain to hold the table in place over the window, but the constant pressure from the other side has quickly exhausted whatever reserves of strength they had left. They begin to wilt under the weight, their legs threatening to betray them and buckle. The door begins to give way, the wood splitting and splintering around Podrick and Tormund. The planks fracture along their join, and grasping hands reach through the wood to snatch and claw for purchase. Beric and Gendry lock eyes. Strangely calm, Beric smiles at the younger man.
Ready, lad?
Gendry nods with resignation. Podrick does likewise. Tormund is not sharing in the moment.
No, I'm not fucking ready!
1,
I said fucking no!
2, 3!
All 4 men dive forward and snatch up their weapons and ready themselves for their last hopeless, heroic stand. The door shatters in its frame. The undead pour into the room like sand through an hourglass. Bran wipes the tears from his eyes. Ned and Catelyn share a private smile.
I promised Theon, if I ever saw you.
He was a good man who lost his way, but he found it again when it really mattered.
He gave his life to save mine, and if he sees me here, I don't want him to think he failed me. Failed you.
Don't worry, Bran.
Bran turns and discovers Theon standing beside Catelyn, smiling.
I didn't fail.
But the Night King's sword. How can I...
Bran lifts his shirt. The corruption has spread, and now his entire midsection has turned black. He looks to Ned in confusion.
We're all of us more than the face that stares back at us in the mirror, Bran.
Bran looks back over his shoulder. All his loved ones have gathered together. Maester Luwin, Hodor, Osha, Robb, Rickon, and Catelyn. Summer wrestles and rolls about on the lush green grass with Lady, Shaggy Dog and Grey Wind. Bran searches for one more face.
Is Jon here?
What makes you ask that?
I made a mistake. If I hadn't sent him into an ambush... I was just trying to help, to find answers to the Night King. But I kept ending up in the wrong places, at the wrong times.
If I'm really the answer to some ancient prophecy, some great destiny, then everything that's happened, everything I've done, I had no hand in any of it. It was always going to happen.
No, never always. Always, perhaps. Every moment contains within it the potential for infinite others. Nothing is fated. Everything is possible.
If Jaime Lannister had never pushed you from that tower, you would never have travelled north, never become the Three-Eyed Raven, never have the visions that sent Jon and Daenerys beyond the wall.
If your father had remained true to his wife Elia, if Eddard Stark had left you to die beside your mother in her birthing bed, if his secret was betrayed to King Robert and your family name condemned you to the same brutal death as Rhaegar's other children,
if the Mad King had never condemned his own people to the fires, there had been no need for his children to flee into exile. His daughter would never receive 3 dragon eggs on her wedding day, never lose a dragon to the Night King, and never leave Jon to die.
if you had deserted the Night's Watch when they took Ned Stark's head, or turned your cloak and joined the Free Folk, if you ducked left instead of dodging right, and died on the point of some anonymous Bolton soldier's blade, then your promise withers on the vine, uncalled upon and unrealised. You are the prince that was promised, yes, but only a child confuses a promise with a guarantee.
There are no wrong places, Bran. No wrong times. Only good choices and bad, and where they lead you next.
To Jon, to the Iron Throne, to Daenerys and her dragons. Everything that's happened, all this time, that's where it was all leading?
If this was always about Daenerys and her dragons, why did so many have to suffer and die along the way? I lost good friends, brothers, at the fist of the first men, and at Hardhome.
You do them a disservice, Jon Snow. They were not bit part players in the Dragon Queen story or your own. They were the hero of their own story. Theirs was no less important simply because it ended sooner.
There's more to the story than kings and queens alone, Bran.
Every line on the page, even if it might seem unimportant in the moment, it all matters. We all matter to how the story ends.
Each life is like a fine thread, stitched together into an ever-unfurling tapestry, No one thread there at the beginning is ever there at the end. Sooner or later, the spool spins empty, but the tapestry itself continues.
And this is the end?
One of them. Aye.
Daenerys brings Drogon down to land beside the steep slope of debris that fills the dragon pit. Viserion has somehow pulled himself clear of the rubble, but lost a wing in the process. Drogon lashes out and wrenches Viserion's head clean off his body. Drogon spits out his prize, presenting it at Daenerys' feet. She steps around the decapitated head without looking at it, and circles the mountain of rubble, then begins to climb. She heaves aside a pair of modest boulders, and the resultant rockslide reveals what she's looking for. The Night King lies pinioned on his back, one arm trapped between two slabs and his bottom half all but liquefied beneath an enormous marble plinth. Daenerys is in no hurry. She crouches down. He swipes at her with his free arm, but she avoids it effortlessly. Daenerys studies the Night King, watches her reflection in the deep, dark pools of blue that regard her with frozen indifference, even now. Already the snow is beginning to reclaim the remains of the dragon pit, a layer of fine white powder settling over the scene. The Night King ceases his flailing and lies still, returning her gaze. 1,000 snowflakes flutter down through their shared field of vision in the time they spend simply staring into one another's eyes. The Night King's attention drifts beyond Daenerys as the shadow of Drogon descends them both into darkness. In his very last moment, the Night King's face has betrayed some small sliver of expression. It almost looks like relief. Drogon needs no command. He rears back, bares his teeth, and bathes the Night King in dragonfire. Tormund, Podrick, Beric and Gendry raise their weapons and lunge at the front lines of the undead. Then stop. Like a row of dominoes, the foremost ranks of whites topples over into the next. And they into the next. And they the next. The horde of undead crowding outside the inn topples too, whites collapsing into and over and on top of one another to form a pile of bodies half as high as the roof of the inn. Podrick slumps to the ground, exhausted. Tormund lifts Gendry off his feet into a bear hug. Beric drops to his knees and whispers a silent prayer. Tormund's elephant lumbers out from between two buildings and into the open space once occupied by the great sept of Baelor.
She made it!
The Hound sits propped against the rock at the cavern's edge, both hands held tightly across his belly to keep his innards from escaping. The fire rages inside the cavern, black smoke billowing out and up into the sky. At the end of the promontory, a taut strip of burlap sends up a fine plume of dust as it grinds down the surface of the rock it's wrapped around. The fabric jitters and vibrates under the tension. Arya hauls herself up and over the ledge. She lies panting on her back, her exhausted arms limp at her side. She rolls to her knees, staggers up to her feet, and retrieves Needle from the dirt. Feeling her shadow fall across him, the Hound cracks open his eyes and moves his hands aside to show her his mortal wound. Neither offers any comment. None is needed.
I've come all this way, and I end up in the same fucking place.
Not exactly the same.
Looks like you're gonna last longer than me after all.
Arya studies the Hound, reading every last detail of his face, just as she was trained to.
Was it worth it?
I'm holding onto my guts with my hands. So right this second I'd say no. Of course it wasn't fucking worth it.
He looks over at the mountain's body a few feet away, and then at his head a few feet further. The Hound grins.
But weighed against 30 years of hate, it was worth it.
Arya remains impassive. She raises Needle.
Are you ready?
The Hound looks out over the promontory to the water beyond. He follows the snow as it falls, holds out a hand to feel it melt on the burned flesh of his palm. Finally, he leans back and rests his head against the rock.
Another name off your list.
Arya gives him the mercy she once refused him. True to her word, she shoves her sword through the Hound's eye and out the back of his skull. Jaime emerges from the tunnels, but finds navigating the castle in the old way impossible. Great stone blocks stand in place of staircases. Trails of debris delineate the collapsed walls of the royal chambers. Piles of rubble recall the corridors that connected them. Jaime is forced to circle around the ruins to find a point of entry. He passes through the gardens, glancing without recognition at the overturned chairs and white wooden trellis of the morning's abandoned ceremony. Entering the Godswood, Jaime unconsciously slows his steps in deference to the eerie, undisturbed sense of hermetic calm cast by the ancient trees and their snow-covered canopy. Jaime takes in the blasted interior of the castle. The cliff-facing wall is entirely gone, the surviving interior already several feet deep in snow. Jaime just barely has time to escape the path of the collapsing third-floor ceiling and the two lower floors it brings down with it. Clambering through stacks of rock, squeezing between slabs of stone, stepping over kindling of shattered furniture, Jaime finally finds his sister, standing at the centre of what was once the Great Hall, just within the shadow of the teetering northern tower. He watches her for a long moment as she stares out over the city, hugging herself against the cold, the wind tussling the hair that shines the same golden blonde as his own. He realizes she must have been standing here for some time. A dusting of snow covers her shoulders. When he takes a step and announces himself, Cersei turns, and the snow flutters free and dances away on the wind.
Thank the gods you're alive.
You sent Bronn to kill me.
I would never do that. You have to believe me. It must have been Qyburn that gave the order.
You also told the mountain to kill me not 10 minutes ago. I may be the stupidest Lannister, but even I learned my lessons eventually.
Tyrion turned you against me. That twisted little monster couldn't rest until you hated me as much as he does.
For once in our lives, you give Tyrion too much credit. You made me hate you all by yourself. You took someone very special from me.
Another section of the castle collapses somewhere on the other side of the central tower.
We came into this world together, Jaime. There can't be anything more special than that. Nobody knows you like I do. Nobody loves you like I do.
You don't even know what that word means, Cersei.
I loved our children. Our beautiful children.
Yes. You loved our children.
Jaime sighs and throws down his sword. He crosses the floor of white-coated rubble and embraces her. Cersei sobs against his chest as the Red Keep crumbles all around them.
It's over, Cersei. It's all over.
Oh, Jaime. What are we going to do?
Jaime pulls back and looks down into Cersei's upturned face.
I'm going to do what a Lannister always does. A Lannister always pays his debts.
Jaime wraps his hand around Cersei's throat. Cersei struggles, beats at him with her fists, but Jaime holds his grip. The steady fall of rubble gives way to a great rush of rock that shatters the last load-bearing wall of the northern tower. The topmost floors lurch over and plummet down into the castle below. Like a house of cards, one cataclysm precipitates another, and soon everything but the central column has collapsed into one great mountainous ruin. The platform rumbles and shakes as it sheds its adjoining architecture, the Red Keep crumbling away to leave the throne room a lonely sentry atop its dogged, half-demolished post of singed brick and broken stone.
He could have told us, could have made his true purpose known.
And you'd have listened? Believed? Come, Jon Snow. Even now, when your heart and head together scream the truth of everything I've told you, still you deny the choice you know it's long past time you made.
What choice?
The choice with which all great men and women are faced, sooner or later. When your hand is forced and your options exhausted, how much are you prepared to give? How far does your sense of duty extend?
Jon studies Melisandre's face, then looks beyond her over King's Landing, the snow-covered city now pockmarked with craters like the surface of an alien moon. Jon closes his eyes and feels the wind and snow against his skin.
What do I have to do?
Simply return to the Lord of Light that which he leased you.
Understanding slowly creeps across Jon's face.
When the Lord of Light brought you back, he rekindled the fire that has always burned within you. To become what you were always destined to be, you need only let the Lord of Darkness do the same for the ice that burns beside it.
Melisandre produces a second knife from the folds of her cloak, this one bearing a blade of ink-black obsidian.
Bare your chest, Jon Snow.
Jon peels back his leathers, his fingertips tracing the scarred half-moon of his brother's traitorous steel.
This will hurt.
With a tremorous hand, Melisandre raises the shard of dragonglass and rests the point against Jon's chest.
But only once, and then never again.
She brings up a second hand to steady the first and begins to push. In the tunnels beneath the Red Keep, the fire has died out, and the last of the smoke escaped through the collapsed wall overlooking the sea. Both halves of Euron lie where the mountain left them. Further along the tunnel, the mountain's decapitated head lies staring sightlessly back at his body. A little further again, the Hound sits propped against the wall where Arya left him, his face lit by the first tentative light of a gradually brightening sky. The black cells have burned even blacker, soot and ash smearing the walls, a filthy streaked midnight. A grotesquely enticing aroma of well-cooked meat fills the corridor. The bodies once belonging to Archmaester Ebros and Ilaria and Tyene Sand sizzle and roast in their cells. The fires in Qyburn's laboratory burn with green, blue and purple flames. Every time they threaten to diminish, the blaze finds fresh supply of fuel among Qyburn's eclectic store of supplies. Glass jars explode, mysterious liquids boil and fizz, and Qyburn burns beside his little birds. The ruins of the Red Keep stack taller than a man, yet still more pieces of the castle crumble loose of the lone tower and walls and crash into the debris below. As the sun begins to emerge from behind the clouds, its rays catch something glinting amid the rubble. A golden hand protrudes from the wreckage, its luster dulled by the heavy coat of dust and grime that covers it. The first tentative sprinkling of sunlight finds King's Landing entirely still, utterly silent. Between the dragons, elephants, the battles between the living and undead, much of the capital has been razed to the ground. Without disturbing the strange serenity of the snow-covered city, the scene slowly begins to shift. The snowfall begins to lessen, then stops completely. The last of the clouds disperse. The sun rolls back the shadows and begins the work of warming the frozen city.